You can now get a DIY COVID test delivered straight to your door. But, how reliable are they really? Well, we put the tests to the test and asked a few experts.
And in my opinion, having a bad test is actually worse than not having a test at all.
And one more thing, if you think this is your ticket to a big Thanksgiving dinner, think again. And we've now hit the 6-month mark of regular protests and vandalism in Portland. But some activists are trying to separate themselves from the anarchists. And if you were laid off this year, you're finally getting your waiting week payment. Better 8 months late than never, I guess. Might actually be in your bank account right now. Here's the story.
Hey, while you got the phone out checking those bank balances, send us a message. Huh? Tell us what's on your mind. What kind of stories do you think we should be covering here on The Story? I'm Dan Haggerty, and this is The Story. Both of those are written on the wall behind me there. You can see all the ways to reach out to us, though, on the bottom of your screen. So pick one, send a message our way, and maybe we'll talk about it. Let's get started. Now, I know that life has pretty much gone digital. That's why we talk to you the way we do, and portable. Everything you can do is pretty much done right on your phone, or almost everything. You get your shopping list, your photo album, even your news. Maybe that's where you're watching me right now. That's why I'm constantly asking you to tweet us during the show. I know your phone's not far away, but the printed word still carries a lot of power. And if you subscribe to the Oregonian and you get a physical newspaper sent to your house, you witnessed that power yesterday. The state of Oregon put out this full-page ad in the Sunday edition. You can't miss it. It's the color of a New York City taxi, and just as aggressive, if you ask me. The big text there, 788 words we wish we didn't have to print. Then they print the 788 words in question. Please, written over and over and over again, 788 times, one for every Oregonian who died of COVID-19. It ends with, please limit your gatherings this holiday and wear a mask. Now, it is worth pointing out that that number, 788, is already outdated. See, today, a day later, it's up to 826 dead, 38 more since yesterday. I don't know if a blaring full-page ad will be enough to convince folks to be safe this Thanksgiving, to stay home and to celebrate with their one household or maybe one other, but no more than 6 people according to the governor's orders. I do know that from Friday to Sunday, more than 3 million people passed through an airport security checkpoint somewhere in this country, and certainly more going to do that before Thursday. But the magic words this entire time, the ones you should be repeating to yourself, have been common sense. Use common sense and do what's best for you and your family. And remember, what you want isn't always what's best. But I hope for the sake of my family and everybody else's family that common sense prevails. All right, now let's talk about the big story. You'd also think that, considering everything we're talking about and how many COVID cases we've been seeing, that hospitalizations are up and that deaths are up, it would be a little bit easier to actually go out and get a COVID test. But if you've tried, you know that that's not exactly the case. Even if you can find an appointment that is open, it still takes you days and days to get in there and get that test done. So it's really not that big of a surprise that a lot of people have been turning to these at-home COVID tests as if you need another reason to stay in your house. But Kristen Severance wanted to see if they're actually worth it.
Tonight, the coronavirus skyrocketing to new records. And now
the surge in COVID cases in Oregon, Washington, and across the country has people on edge. Testing is more important now than ever. So when an Oregon company in viral tech emailed offering to send an at-home COVID surface test, I said yes. Businesses use the kit to test high-traffic areas to try and detect COVID before an outbreak. The email from EnviralTech also spurred me to start researching other at-home COVID tests, from the companies, the cost, and effectiveness. These tests are for people, not businesses, and there are a lot of them. The FDA just authorized the first at-home rapid COVID test. You administer the test on yourself at home and get results on the spot in 30 minutes. But that won't be available nationwide until the spring. So what's available right now? Currently, there are 9 companies allowed to sell at-home testing kits by the FDA. They cost between $109 and $155. They use a nasal swab or saliva collection method. You have to fill out a short questionnaire before getting the test delivered to your home, and you have to send the test back to a lab for results. I asked KGW medical expert Dr. Pyle Coley for her take.
What are your thoughts on these, at-home COVID tests?
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that testing needs to be more widespread and more accessible. And that's the huge advantage of these at-home tests, is that they really do bring testing to the person's bedside. But the flip side of the coin is that the tests have to be accurate. And in my opinion, having a bad test is actually worse than not having a test at all.
While the labs claim high accuracy, Dr. Coley points out all of the tests were given emergency FDA authorization, which is different than full FDA approval, meaning the tests did not go through the same rigorous review. She said the collection process could also be an issue.
So specifically for the self-collection kits, you have to put that swab in there. And there are rules given by the CDC as to how long it has to sit in there, how much you have to swirl it around, how far in you have to get it. So all of that is highly dependent on the person who's collecting the sample, and it could very easily have a false negative if somebody doesn't collect their sample appropriately.
We ordered 2 of the at-home tests to see how the process worked. Both used nasal swabs, and both had how-to videos on their website you could watch before taking the test. I ordered the Pixel test on a Thursday. It came mid-morning Friday and cost $119. The instructions were easy. I did my best with the swab and sealed everything up to be sent. The Everlywell test cost $109. I ordered on a Thursday, and it came Friday around 6 in the evening. Both companies said you should take the test and send it out on the same day, and you should not put the kits in a FedEx or UPS box over the weekend. I waited and took both tests on Monday. The Everlywell instructions were a little more involved. For this test, they said to tilt your head back for the nasal swab. You also had to break off the handle of the swab before putting it in the tube and sealing it up. I sent both kits off to be tested in a lab.
I watched a video, but I've never done this before. Does that concern you that, all of these people are ordering tests and then having to do them on themselves?
It does concern me. And I think if we are going to shift from testing from, public health societies and hospitals to at home, which plausibly we could do, then we do need a public health campaign to educate people as to what the correct way to do it is. Just like we did with educating people about how to wear masks and educating people about how to wash their hands.
I got my Pixel results late Tuesday. I tested negative for COVID. The Everlywell results didn't arrive until Thursday. I was also negative. But with the cost and time it takes to get the test and wait for results, I wondered who the tests were meant for. Health experts say there are 2 patient populations the at-home tests may work for: patients in rural areas without access to testing sites, or high-risk patients who want to be tested without leaving their homes.
I can really see this testing kit playing a niche role in that type of patient population.
As for the EnviralTech Surface test, the Oregon company who emailed me and kicked off this whole story, I received 8 swabs and 8 tubes. We tested keypads, doorknobs, and other surfaces all over the station and sent that off the same day. Companies like nursing homes use the swabs to see if COVID is on a surface before an outbreak is detected. We received the results late the next day. Every place we swabbed tested negative for COVID.
None of the surfaces that you've collected samples from showed any signs of COVID. So that's a good thing.
Exactly. So that's what you want, correct?
Of course. Of course you were looking to not have COVID present in your facilities, although we work with a lot of long-term care and senior care facilities. So a positive test, we don't want to see it, but it's helpful because it tells them that they need to take more precautions. Maybe they need to identify who it is who's shedding virus and remove them from the facility, do more cleaning and disinfecting, and that sort of thing.
The bottom line with all these at-home COVID tests, just because you test negative doesn't mean you don't have COVID.
We saw this with President Trump, who is being tested daily. So the negative test today just means there's not enough virus to trigger positivity. It does not mean that there's no virus at all and that you're safe.
Meaning if you get COVID and get tested on the same day, you'll most likely test negative. People should not be using these tests as a way to justify having a large gathering, not wearing masks, or not social distancing. I'm Kristen Severance, KGW News.
So kind of the big takeaway, something we really want to drive home, and Kristen reiterated it at the end. But when it comes to these at-home tests, or really any COVID test, you can't take it too early after you're exposed, or you're not going to get an accurate result. And even then, really, it's not foolproof. But you need to wait at least 5 days after getting exposed for the results to be reliable. That means if you catch COVID, as Kristen said, today and get tested today, it's not going to work. If you get it today and get tested tomorrow, it's most likely going to tell you that you're negative, even though you're not. And doctors actually think that this time period when you are infected but you're not showing any symptoms is when you are the most contagious. And some people really don't show symptoms for up to 14 days. So I know a lot of people are relying on these tests before Thanksgiving, but you need to understand the right way to use them. If you take the test less than 5 days after getting infected, it will almost certainly say that you're negative when you are not. Now, I want to answer a question now that we've been getting pretty regularly. Did Governor Kate Brown attend a conference in Hawaii? So first off, no, she did not. But let me explain why people might think that. See, last week, about 100 people, including 20 Democratic and Republican lawmakers from Washington, California, and Texas, traveled to Maui for an annual 4-day conference held at this resort. And it looks amazing, and I think a lot of us wish we were there right now, but that's not the point. See, the Independent Voter Project organized this trip, and they were focusing on how to reopen economies. But like I said, Governor Brown did not attend, nor did any state lawmakers from Oregon. Governor Jay Inslee did not go either. But we do know some Washington lawmakers went. However, we don't know who exactly went or how many of them made the trip. But you can't imagine that these leaders are getting a lot of heat for traveling when they themselves have been telling people not to travel right now, especially when so many of us have canceled plans for Thanksgiving for this exact reason. The people who went to that conference had to provide proof of a negative COVID test taken within 72 hours of their arrival in Hawaii. But as we just talked about, those can be unreliable sometimes, give false negatives, or taking a test too early can impact whether or not they accurately tell you that you are infected. Now, for what it's worth, there was at least one local leader who did make it out to Hawaii. We're talking about Multnomah County Commissioner Sharon Myron. She's taken some heat right now for her decision to spend 2 weeks on the Big Island. And we just talked to her on the phone. And Myron said that she's been working remotely and vacationing. Myron saw no problem with her travel, she says, because she left before the governor's travel advisory. However, her husband did not. We literally just heard about this story. That interview wasn't from that long ago. Kyle Aboshi's digging into it for us right now, and he's got a lot more information if you're interested in that specific angle at kgw.com. But we're going to cover it in more detail later this week. Let's get into another question right now. It's one that we keep revisiting here, and it's from a viewer named Cy. Is there an update regarding the waiting week payments in Oregon? Well, Cy, I'm happy to report that we finally have a solid answer for you. After 8 months, the Employment Department started issuing waiting week checks today. Okay, it just started happening. Sigh, you can let out a sigh of relief. Here's a refresher on kind of what's going on here. The waiting week is that first week that you're unemployed, and Oregon usually doesn't pay that out that first week. But because of the pandemic, way back when it started, Congress told the states, go ahead and get that waiting week out and pay it. Oregon was the only state that hasn't done that until now. The Employment Department says $176 million worth of waiting week payments went out to more than 246,000 Oregonians today. You're going to get that money the same way you've gotten other unemployment checks. Now, before you scramble to check your bank account, know that it might still take a little bit longer to show up. Most people should get it within 3 business days, but unfortunately, some still have to wait a little bit longer. Payments for 170,000 people will be delayed until December because they have to manually process those ones. So if you're expecting a payment for that waiting week, keep an eye out. It should show up automatically.
When the story continues, viewers want to know, have the protests ended? The answer is no. But what they stand for now? Mayor Wheeler has one theory.
They're not supporting some just cause. They're vandals.
And 2 huge setbacks hitting one of the Oregon coast's biggest industries.
I think my husband has worked the least amount this year than in all 26 years of our marriage. I mean,
Hey, welcome back. People have been really engaging with this show lately. We got a lot of comments rolling in, people using the hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. But I want more. I'm greedy. I want to know what's going on. I can't tell you how much your feedback helps us do this show. So the more we get, the better the show gets. Keep sending those emails to the story at kgw.com as well. I almost read some of them at the end of the show, too. So stick around and maybe I'll read yours. I do want to jump right into a question that we've been getting quite a bit in the past few weeks. This one comes from Paul in Albany. Are the daily protests still going on in Portland, or did they end with either the Biden victory or the fall rain and chill? Or maybe I've just been missing the coverage. So, Paul, thank you for that question. We haven't seen crowds or protests like we saw in the summer, okay, with hundreds of people filling the streets downtown. But there have been some demonstrations and even the occasional dust-up with police recently. I actually want to talk about what we saw in Portland on Friday night. Police say 2 different groups vandalized dozens of buildings across the city, including the Mexican consulate downtown and the Multnomah County Courthouse. Police didn't make any arrests in these events here. They said everybody ran when they showed up. Then on Saturday, another group damaged 27 businesses along Northeast Sandy, including the Hollywood Theater. And while all year long, some Portland leaders have been pretty careful about criticizing protesters or demonstrators who commit these acts of vandalism, Mayor Wheeler wasn't watching his words today.
These are not protesters engaged in this activity. They're not supporting some just cause. They're vandals and they're criminals. And as such, they need to be arrested and they need to be held accountable.
The mayor said he planned to meet with Police Chief Chuck Lavelle tonight to see what tools he needs to end this. And to that end, I want to tell you about an article that we think is worth your time. It's in OPB by reporters Jonathan Levinson and Sergio Olmos. The headline is, in America's whitest city, black activists struggle to separate themselves from anarchists. The story summarizes that divide between some of the activist groups who have been taking over the streets all year long. Point being, not all protesters are the same. There's a lot of people out fighting for social justice right now. There's a lot of anti-capitalist anarchists out there as well, and they don't always work together. They talked to some of the black activists who worried that they're going to be getting lumped in with anarchists who are committing these acts of violence. It's a complicated story, of course, about Portland's extremely complicated protesting legacy. So I wanted to unpack it a bit with one of the reporters who wrote it, Jonathan Levinson from OPB.
The racial justice protesters we spoke to and activists, some of them just got into activism in May, and other elements have been doing this for decades and are just sort of sitting back being like, that's not how this is done, So they're absolutely, none of them, they're not a monolith at all. Especially, I would say, not the sort of black bloc Antifa protesters. There is a hardline element that has been out there recently, and the goals may be common, maybe shared across the spectrum, but the tactics are a little more controversial at times. But
is there a concern that this is going to completely derail any long-term progress, considering that typically messaging is so important? It's so important to have a focus, especially when you're trying to make changes to a system that has been operating in a similar fashion for hundreds of years.
I don't think among the people I've spoken to that there is concern about, messaging or losing the PR fight. I think, no, I don't think that's a big concern. I think that they believe in what they're doing and that they believe that economic justice is fundamental to, creating a better society, and that they will keep fighting to do it. I also think, there's a long history of activism and social justice movements in this country that have all these different elements to them, and I think it's sort of erasing one part of history to say, oh, we need the peaceful protests, the peaceful marches, but we don't want any of this other problematic stuff that is really uncomfortable and creates a little bit of, damage, like structural damage or, blocking traffic or whatever it is. All of those things go hand in hand, and you don't have progress on one side without the other. And so if you believe in the movement, I think you can't take one part of that out.
There's a very interesting moment in the story. They talk about a night when one group tried to get another group to stop the destruction and march together, and they talk about the disagreement that followed in that moment. The whole story is up right now at opb.org. Check it out because we think it's worth your time. Now, the Oregon coast is a cash cow, which is a kind of a mixed metaphor because we're going to be talking about crabs, not cows. So it's a cash crab. Look, obviously, lots of crabbing goes on at the Oregon coast, but probably a lot less this year, and for two reasons. Christelle Kumwe tells us what they are.
Crab season typically runs from December to August, but there is nothing typical about the year 2020.
I think my husband has worked the least amount this year than in all 26 years of our marriage.
That's because the pandemic hit restaurants worldwide and the demand for crab fell significantly. Melissa Clemens' husband is a commercial crab fisherman in Charleston on the southern Oregon coast.
When this all first started going down, we really didn't think it was going to affect the commercial fishing industry all that much, because those guys are out on the boat. So it really, you wouldn't think that it would.
But it did. The processing plants were not selling as much overseas, so they bought less crab from the fishermen. With few buyers, the fishermen were stuck at home. They looked forward to the opening of the season, but then came the news they hoped wouldn't come from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
The season is now delayed till at least mid-December to give the crab a little bit more time to fill out and become really high quality.
Tests found crabs needed more time to grow.
I think I could probably pretty much speak for the entire fishing industry when we say that we never count on it happening December 1st.
The season has been delayed for the past several years, either because the crabs weren't big enough or because of something called domoic acid, which is bad for humans.
We haven't seen big issues with domoic acid so far this year. We'll of course, be continuing to test any areas of concern. But good news so far on that front.
There's a chance the season could start on December 16th, but that problem with the pandemic in restaurants is still there, and it's unclear how many people will be buying crab.
It's unclear exactly what the impacts will be, but certainly expect that to be a discussion amongst the processors and fishermen when they're talking about setting prices and bringing crab to market.
Back on the southern Oregon coast, Clemens hopes the season will start soon. Families are getting desperate.
We filed for unemployment in March on my husband, and we waited 17 weeks to see a dime. And if we did not have any savings to live on, we would have really been hurting. If they start on time, if they start December 15th, most of these guys will be lucky to see a paycheck before Christmas hits. That's just how it falls.
4 years ago, Clemens and others formed an organization called Charleston Fishing Families to help fishing families during hard times. This year, they are helping dozens of families with COVID relief, and that includes gift cards, meals, and even brand new toys for kids this holiday season. We have more information about the nonprofit at kgw.com. I'm Christelle Kumwe for KGW News.
All right, thanks to Christelle, and thanks to all of you. I'm checking your messages right now. People using the hashtag HeyDan or emailing us at thestory@kgw.com. I'm going to read a few and try and answer, a couple right after the break. Stick around. We'll see you when the commercials are over. First, a tweet from Ryan Lounsbury. Hey, Dan, the story has the best bumper music. I always look forward to the intro and the outro. Dude, I'm with you. It's funny, a lot of people didn't like this music at all when we first started, but the naysayers have started to abandon social media. Maybe people are starting to like it. It's just my theory on it. Talking about the waiting week. Said, for the waiting week, is it going to be automatic or do we need to file a new claim? You don't need to file a new claim. It should come the same way you've been getting all of your other payments. You can hop on the website right now through the state and check the status of it if you're curious. Also, Chris Norman wanted to know, you need to ask the state why it's distributing those only now, why the delay. So we've been covering that kind of through this entire process. It really came down to old computers and when they had the workers and the ability to turn away from the need to get people the money they were trying to get them through the whole process and turn to this waiting week, which they have now been able to luckily focus on. And then lastly, Lorna said, why does your wife do all the work and you get to tell the story? Curious about my wife's story, Kristen's story off the top about the take-home COVID tests. Why? Why bring that up? Why phrase it that way? She's going to remember that, and I'm going to be in trouble. That's the story. Thanks, Lorna. Thanks to all of you. See you tomorrow.